Oh, yeah. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Podcasters Lounge. I hope everything sounds fine. I've been tweaking my audio like mad, but the lounge is where us podcasters, we just hang out and chat about anything. So if you're in the chat, definitely say hi. And also, we have a very special guest today. Seth Silvers is with us. He is the founder and CEO of Story On Media, which is a firm that helps podcasters basically expand their reach through podcasting. So, Seth, welcome, my brother.
Thanks, man. Really happy to be here. Always enjoy talking with you, so I'm excited to be in the lounge.
Cool. Yeah, so I know my audio, I think, is pretty loud. I jacked it up, and you're using that. That's a Shure MV7, right?
Correct. Yep. Yeah, I can turn it up if I need. Or
I don't know if I'm hearing that though. Just tap on it. Yeah, I don't think I'm hearing a room mic. It sounds like. Oh yeah.
Here we go. Is that better?
Oh yeah. Oh, that's way better. Yeah.
Okay, good. It was. I think it was picking up from my camera. So anyway.
Okay. Cool. And also
on some days.
Yeah. Oh, of course. This happens every day to everybody, so it's not a problem. But I want to because I think I'm quite a bit louder than you. So if you can click on your, maybe I can do it. Oh wait, edit mic settings.
Yeah. Is this good? Is this better? I turned it up a bit.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that should be good.
Okay.
And are you wearing headphones too?
I'm hearing you through my headphones, so I'm not hearing myself. Maybe I should be.
No, that's fine. As long as you're hearing me there, that's fine.
Yep.
I just wanted to crank up the level.
Cool. Sounds good.
Yeah. Maybe whatever you turned up, turn it down a hair. Now it's like distorting kind of.
All right. This should be a bit better.
Okay.
Cool.
Yeah, and now I'm cranking up your StreamYard gain. So I can edit. I'm going to edit all this out, obviously.
Cool.
Yeah. All right. Well, I hope our levels are similar. I can never tell. But okay. So yeah, man, it's great for you to be here. Great to hang out. I mean, we've talked a bunch of times, and the lounge is where we just hang out. But every time I hear you speak, I learn so much, and like I always. It's such valuable, like you have so much experience, not only starting podcasts, but like designing podcasts and all that. So I just want to get so into all that. But the first question is, when you talk to people about podcasting and growing their brand or growing their business through a podcast, what is like the main thing that catches most people? Like it makes them the light bulb turn on and be like, oh yeah, that I could do a podcast like that and it would help my business. What is it?
I wish I knew more clearly, because then I'd be able to just say more of that. But I think like some of the light bulb moments are, I think when people realize a podcast doesn't have to be super complicated. I think that's a light bulb moment that I hear often from people. A light bulb moment that also like attracts the right people to us and also like repels, like shuts people down, is when they realize how long you should podcast before, like it's a long journey. It's a really long game. So that's one thing where when people understand, like there's some people that they're not really that interested in like trying to go viral or trying to be some like YouTuber or follow all the trends. But when they realize that podcasting is a platform where they can show up consistently, get better over time, and that's kind of how the medium works, is being consistent with it and providing value. I think there's a lot of people that aligns really, really well with what they want to do. And so I feel like it took me a while to kind of like realize that, and I'm still realizing that more and more. But that's one like light bulb moment I see a lot of people having, is when we tell them like, hey, you should be measuring your podcast in like years.
Right.
some people are like, okay, I'm out. And some people are like, okay, cool. This is perfect because I'm not going anywhere. I'm building my business over the next handful of years. And that kind of like slow grind really aligns with some people.
Right. Oh, I can imagine that. See, the more honest with you are with them up front, that I can see how a lot of people are like, yeah, I don't want to get into, I don't have 3 years to spend on this.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Like, yeah. I mean, we debated like not working. I've actually done this because in practice, it's the thing that sounds better for us to talk about here than actually do. But I have seen some people do it to where you actually don't work with people unless they're committing to like a 12 or 24 month contract. I think what you want is you want the spirit of that. Like you want people that are committed for the long run. But in practicality, people want to see that what they're doing is working and they at least want to see some positive metrics and different things. But yeah, that long-term mentality in podcasting is super, super important.
And so even if someone commits to doing it for 12 or 24 months, at least, we know that when someone starts doing a podcast, they learn pretty quickly, right? You can start out with a plan, and then 3 months in, you sort of tweak the plan, and then that one little thing you really wanted to put in the show, it just doesn't work anymore, so you get rid of it. And so how do you suggest people change their show? Because it's sort of like a chicken and the egg. When you start a show and you have a plan, you have to work the plan, give it time to succeed. You can't just do it, do something one week and say, oh, that didn't work, I'm going to change the whole show. So how do you balance that? Like when to change it up and when to just keep plugging?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big challenge. And I feel like we're adjusting more and more as we go and as we learn with new shows. I've learned to like use this phrase with some of our clients where you can afford to be patient. So sometimes that means like you have a lot of money and you're a successful business and you have money to be able to pump into podcasting for the next 2 years. And in that sense, you can afford to be patient. Other times you might be paying for that patience in time. You might be able to say, okay, I have the time to do this. But either way, like you're going to be spending a lot of time and probably some money on a podcast. And so I think like you need that patience. We're trying to regularly look at metrics with our shows and we're trying to do it more and more. I would say I've been low on the data and on the metrics of podcasting over the last like year or two, because for a lot of our clients that are businesses, it's been, the metrics matter, but the biggest value of the show is often like a nurturing tool for their audience. They're getting to share their experience and share their thought leadership and share some of their connections with their audience. And so for a lot of shows that we work with, yes, the numbers matter. And there's certain metrics that we use that are like valuable indicators that this is working, but they're not aiming for a 1 million download show, because the way that it's structured, they don't need a 1 million download show. They could have 50 people listening. And if they're the right 50, then that's super, super important. So I think it comes back to really knowing who you're going after, knowing what you're wanting to do. And we're making some switches so that we're going to have more of the metrics and data in front of our clients, because it is important, even though I think some people follow the metrics too much and they're not paying attention to some of the more simple things that are really important as well.
Right. Yeah, it's very difficult. And I've sort of got that from the beginning of my podcasting career, which started in 2012 when I opened up my own physical podcast studio in New Jersey. And I realized right away that it's not, for most podcasters, it's not about the raw numbers. Now, if you just want to have a show, if you just want to have millions of viewers and run ads, and if you want to be like a media like a TV channel or something, like if you really want to go for numbers, that's one game that you can play. But most, probably at least 99% of podcasts they're not playing that game, the numbers game. It's more of a, who am I talking to? How can I make more content and also repurpose content to get it out there?
Right.
And so most people get that.
You need a lot of downloads in order to like really make it work that way. And that's, but a lot of people don't realize that. They're like, cool, so can we get sponsors? And it's like, well, to like really, yes, I mean, maybe, but to like really have it make sense, like you need hundreds of thousands of downloads a month to be like running a podcasting business off sponsorships.
Yeah. You need a lot of listeners just to run ads and make it. So okay, so if you narrow down your audience, this is one question I have about narrowing down your audience. Like, who am I talking to? Who do I want to listen? I mean, one example is my podcast, and I talk about audio production in podcasting because it supports my school. I run a school where I teach people that. So the listeners I want are people who want to learn more about podcast audio production, and they could just be regular podcasters who they just want to know how to do good, create good audio. They don't know anything about audio. Or it can be somebody who wants to start a business producing podcasts. So I mean, for me, I feel like it's kind of simple, but how hard is it to pick who you're aiming at? Because I mean, we can pretend we know who we're aiming at, but once you put something out in the world, you don't really know, do you? Or do you? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I think most shows, this is where they go wrong, is they're trying to have their show be for everybody. So I've learned that like when I'm podcasting, I need to have one person in mind. And I need to really like podcast for that one person. And then over time, I'm going to realize, dang, there's like probably tens of thousands of that one person. And most of this is coming from like a B2B space, this is coming, or at least like a very niche podcast space. So with our shows, like we're very much trying to create that avatar for our clients, and usually it's going to match up with who's their ideal client. Usually, I would say maybe 8 times out of 10, a podcast that's going to make sense for a business is going to focus on serving, inspiring, educating their dream audience. If you don't know who your dream audience is as a business, then you're probably just going to waste a bunch of time and money podcasting because you're going to kind of try to be figuring all of that out. That's not the end of the world. A lot of people podcast for a long time and they kind of evolve their audience, and that's totally fine. Like I expect that to happen. But the ideal scenario is you're creating a podcast for your dream audience that you're already serving. So I think you're a perfect example. It's like your podcast should be valuable for people that care about podcast engineering and those skills and educating themselves and different things like that. I think that clarity of audience it's so important, and a lot of people just aren't even thinking about it. They want to be the next Joe Rogan and they want to serve everybody. And it's like, I think you should have one person in mind when you're podcasting.
All right. My next question could be the dumbest question I ever ask anyone ever, but should a podcaster vocalize like on the show, maybe in their intro? Should they actually say who the show is for? Like blatantly say, hey, this show is for people who A, B, and C.
Yeah. So I would say in some way, shape, or form, yes. I think in the first 60 seconds of your podcast, and I don't have data to back this up, I have my experience. If I am listening to a new podcast, I really care about my time. So I want to know within like 30, 60 seconds, do I care about this podcast? Is it for me or is it not? I think you are doing your audience a disservice if you don't clearly identify who the podcast is for. And I know a lot of people are like, well, maybe somebody will want to stick around. Like maybe somebody who's in another audience will listen and then they'll end up liking it. And it's like, don't try to spend your time with all these fringe people. So I do think that in the first 30 or 60 seconds of the show, you have to hook them. And you also have to give your audience an opportunity to raise their hand and say, this is for me, I want to stay, or this is not for me, I want to get out of here. And you want them to make that decision as quickly as they can, because it doesn't serve you or them for somebody that isn't in your audience to stick around. So that can be super obvious, and, saying, hey, this show is for business owners who are doing $3 million to $4 million a year and are looking for a venture capital exit or a private equity firm to come in. It could be super specific like that, where it's like very data driven. It also can be more like, I don't know if this is the right term, but more like psychographic. And so that might be, one of the shows that we're working on. It's for businesses that are doing at least $3 million a year, that are wanting to scale to 8 or 10. But more than that, it's for business owners that are really sick of intangible business shows. And it's for business owners that are wanting to actually know the practical steps to scaling past 8 figures. And so that is where, for that, it might be, hey, are you a podcaster? And this is actually in the client's language, so forgive the language. But he initially says, if you're a business owner who has already found success, but you are sick of business shows and you're looking for no bullshit business advice that helps you get past $10 million, then you're in the right place. It's like something like that. You're not saying I'm looking for 35-year-old men, but you're kind of throwing out these characteristics really quickly to where somebody's going to be like, I don't really care about that. I'm not in that season of life. But then somebody else can be like, oh my gosh, this sounds like exactly what I'm looking for.
Yeah. And what about podcasters who are not discussing business or anything like that? Like, because a lot of podcasts, it's just a bunch of friends, they hang out and talk. I mean, and they have topics they talk about. But if it's just me and 2 friends and we're just hanging out, shooting the breeze, maybe around a topic, but we're not really looking to sell anything or anything like that. Should shows like that also, say at the beginning what the show's about to some degree?
Yeah. So that's a good question. And this is where we get a little bit out of my depth to where I have ideas, but probably not actionable ideas. So I have thoughts around fiction podcasts, how to do that with fiction podcasts, but then also similar more podcast genres like you're talking about, where it's more conversational. And I think, I've met so many people that they're like, okay, cool. Like I have a lot of things to say. So me and my friend are going to start saying them. I do still think that, well, I guess to back up, it really depends on what you want. If the goal of that podcast is for you and your friend to be able to sit down and talk about what you want to talk about, and you don't really care about the listenership, then great. Like if the podcast truly, if you're okay with maybe getting, I'm getting a weird phone call. Sorry, some of my computer is calling. No, it's just funny because I've never gotten a phone call through Facebook. And I got one yesterday and I got one today. And today's one is from somebody that I don't even really know. That's weird. Anyway, I do think that it probably is. I think that you still have to know, like, if you're just going to be talking with your friends, are you going to be interested in still doing, if there's 4 people listening each week? If you're wanting to grow the show, if that's a goal to grow the show, you have to have clarity in who is this show for and how are you serving them. And so then that does require you to come back and say, okay, Chris, you and I, we both care about faith. We both care about podcasting. We both care about Colorado. Does it make sense for us just to sit down once a month and talk about those 3 things? We might enjoy it, but if we're actually trying to build an audience, then we probably need to put a little bit more thought into who is this for and how is it going to be valuable enough for them to where they're going to give 30 minutes of the week to it. And so I do still think you need to be asking questions and looking into it. It might be a little bit less structured than like a business show for business people, but you still need to be thinking about who are you creating your content for. I think it's honestly, I think it's kind of disrespectful to the medium of podcasting and disrespectful to people for us to assume that just because I'm talking to the world that people actually care and want to hear what I say, other than my parents. But they probably still don't even listen to maybe my mom might be listening to this. If you are, I love you, but she's probably not listening to this.
Hi, Mom. Yeah, no, that makes sense. But at the same time, if friends just want to hang out and talk and see where it goes, I think that's cool too. Because one of my observations in the podcasting world, because I've I've started many shows and I've stopped doing many shows, right? Like every show that I started and then sometime later I'm like, it's not working. We're quitting it. And actually I want to ask you about your show, because you didn't quit your show, but you very purposefully stepped away. Well, I want to talk about that next, but everything I've ever done in podcasting has helped me so much. Every show I started that didn't make it, that did not become successful, even that was huge. Well, at least very helpful in terms of my growth. So in one sense, well, certainly I agree with what you're saying. It is, I like the way you put it. Seems a little bit disrespectful to the audience not to just care about them at all. And also, if you're starting a show and you just want to mess around and play around and get some experience and have fun, then there's not much wrong with that either, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And there's some genres in podcasting that they just kind of seem to like break the rules, but there's also still trends within them. So like comedy is one of those. There's a ton of comedy shows where from the outside, it definitely just appears that, you know, four dudes are sitting down on a couch and they're just like talking about their life, and somehow they are freaking hilarious and I want to listen. But at the same time, like there got to be relatability. And so even when you look at these shows that seem random, there's still going to be some themes like, oh, I can relate to them. Like they're making jokes or they're talking about something that is funny to me. Or Joe Rogan, who like is a good example of somebody who breaks all the rules. I tell my clients this all the time. Like I will never recommend to a new podcaster that you do 3-hour shows 3 times a week with where most of the shows are very, very different people. They're like people with super deep knowledge of from across a variety of industries, and that like you give them alcohol and you give them pot and you just sit there and talk. I would not recommend that, but you even look at it and you look at how his show has evolved. Like he started out talking about fighting, and I don't even listen to every one of his shows. I'll maybe go once every month or two and look and just be like, who has he interviewed? There's like him and maybe like Lex Friedman and Dak Shepard. There's like a couple of the big shows. I feel like once every couple of months I'll just go and look and be like, who are they interviewing? Like, you know, they're good shows. Who are they interviewing? And there's still these threads through it. You know, his show started out with fighting. I don't really care about fighting, and you know, now he's kind of gotten more into like really going deep into these interesting topics. So there's still these threads where it's like, I want to learn about these super interesting topics. And I do think that non-podcasters look at podcasting and they think like, cool, podcasting is just about showing up and talking about whatever you want to talk about. That could be the case, but I do not think your show is going to be successful. And I think the shows that are successful, there is a little bit of a plan. Most of the time, there is a lot of a plan, and there's a lot of intentionality behind that. And so showing up to just like talk about whatever you want to talk about, it might get you started. And if it does, then great. But over time, we need to like have that strategy in place.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like you look at any top professional in the world, even in sports or chess, or the people who are the best in their field, they make everything look easy. It's like, it looks like that it's just so easy that you could just do the same thing. It's that easy, but you can't, because like you said, there's so much going on in the background. So you actually were doing a show called The Small Business Storytellers, and you actually, and by the way, the link is below. It's storytellers.chat. Everyone can go listen to it. I recommend it.
Yep.
But you, at one point, you decided that, okay, I'm going to stop doing that. Is that what happened? So tell us why, because that's remarkable.
Yeah. So, we have 100 episodes. It's really fun. Like it got me into podcasting accidentally. I started the show late 2018, and just wanted to tell kind of what I described it as is telling some of the best business stories you've never heard of. And so, you know, got to interview and meet a lot of amazing people in town, in Fort Collins, where I am from, grew to shift how the show was done. So like I can share some of the more, knowing your audience, like I can share kind of some of the more technicalities and different things, but like, at first I like had multiple spent thousands of dollars on video cameras and was doing it all in person, and multiple, like, hired somebody that was going to, go in and create all these trailers and all of this stuff. And after the first like 10 episodes, I was like, man, this is a lot of work. To like really do, I don't even want to say do this well, just to do what I thought meant, here's what you need to do a podcast.
Right.
And so then, scaled back production quite a bit, felt insecure about that, felt like that was a back step, started doing more interviews virtually, kind of went through several iterations, but I feel like I kind of got my podcasting. I don't think I have my podcasting doctorate yet, but like learned the basics of podcasting through this show. And then as my business started to grow, because when I started the show, I was doing just small business marketing. And then that show started getting me some other people that said, hey, can you do our podcast for us? Can you produce it? And so I started getting a couple of podcasting clients. And then in 2020, decided to say, okay, we're shutting down all the other marketing stuff and we're just going to focus on helping small businesses get into podcasting. So it really documented kind of the evolution of my journey, got to meet a lot of amazing businesses. And I was doing about 25-minute interviews that were pretty general as far as the focus was. And I started to realize over the last year that I was not excited about recording an episode. And so I asked myself why. I was like, this is interesting. Why is this? And I looked back at the last 20, 30 episodes, and I was like, I think I did those episodes because I'm supposed to do those episodes, not because I wanted to do them. And so there's this interesting dissonance where, for me, where I'm at in business, the content that I'm excited about creating is different than the content that was on that show. So I'm always interested in hearing about somebody's story, and I understand. And I also will acknowledge, like, there's probably people listening that are like, oh, you should have done this or this or this. I might have made the wrong decision. I don't know. But at the time it felt like it was like, for me to keep doing this every week, like I maybe should be, from a technical standpoint and from a business advice standpoint, which is probably what I would advise a client, is like, yeah, if you're asking me, should you have a weekly podcast or should you not? I'm going to say, yes, you should have a weekly podcast. But what I've learned is that if you're not excited about that podcast, then you're not going to create that great content. If you're not creating great content, your audience isn't going to like it. And if your audience doesn't like it, your show's not going to grow. And then it just ends up being a massive waste of time, where you just spent a ton of time doing something that you aren't as excited about, and that's not getting you results. So for me, it was a little bit stepping back and saying, what does it look like? Like, should we be podcasting? Yes, absolutely. What does it look like for me to be podcasting in a way that I'm excited about, in a way that reflects where I am currently? And I believe that the result of that will be a show that's actually growing, and that is actually serving my audience, as opposed to me just doing, at the time, what was like, okay, let's do these 25-minute interviews. Tell me your story. Tell me your challenges, that kind of thing. There's a place for that, but it wasn't with what we're doing. So that was why ultimately I was like, you know what, we are going to launch another podcast this year, maybe a couple, but realizing when we do, those are going to be things that we're particularly really excited about and that get me excited as a creator. Otherwise it's not worth us doing. And so that was, long story short, that kind of was what ultimately led me to the decision of like, I'm really grateful for this. We're going to post one last episode and we're going to let that content live there forever. We're not going to shut down the feed. And we're going to start a new business show this year for a little bit different of an audience. It's going to be an audience that is looking more to like solve really specific business problems as they grow their business. It's not going to be for an audience that is looking to be inspired by a bunch of business stories. If that is what you're looking for, there's a lot of shows out there like that, and you can go to Small Business Storytellers to check that out. So that's kind of been what the journey has looked like. And I just felt like I couldn't hold the space in my brain of maintaining this show just for the sake of maintaining it, while also launching other shows that I feel like I'm super excited about. I felt like this one was going to be taking away from these ones.
Makes total sense, and it really just demonstrates how you have a vision of where you want to go, and what excites you and what inspires you. And if some of the smaller things, some of the things you're doing day to day are not feeding that vision and that inspiration, then they're not helping, right? They're actually hurting. So just being able to realize that is pretty huge. I mean, and then having the guts to step away, because a lot of people would say, oh, but I've spent so much time on this, right? They think, oh, I've put so much time into it already. Am I really just going to quit? My mother said I would quit, or my father said I would quit, and here I am, I'm going to quit. It's not about any of that head trash. It's about zooming out and assessing your bigger situation, and then doing day to day what serves that bigger vision and inspiration.
Yeah. I think it's super important for us in whatever journey we're in. Like the self-awareness and of that is really important. And also, I think anytime we are doing something just because we think other people think we should be doing it, that should cause us to pause and step back and at least ask, like, why do I care so much?
Right.
Yeah. It doesn't always mean we should shut things down, but it might.
Right. All right. I want to ask you about likability, because you're working with businesses, and I've worked with plenty of businesses, as clients, and helping them start a podcast and all this stuff. And we all know that in podcasting, the character and the nature of the host is very important. Meaning, some people have nice voices, they have nice characters, they have nice demeanors, and they have a little nice sense of humor, and it all works together, and they just seem very likable. And when you listen to them, it's like they're a friend of yours or something. It's just that natural. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have people who, they don't have a lot of those things. And it's sad when people don't even actually try to be a good presenter and stuff like that. But it does make a difference who's hosting the show. So how do you view that topic and those considerations?
Yeah, it's for sure a factor. I think of somebody like Dax Shepard, an armchair expert, where I never met Dax Shepard. Dax, if you're listening, then I would love to meet you. He just seems like such a likable person. Like, he just seems like, it's like, man, I feel like I could sit down with Dax Shepard, even though I've never met him, and just have a conversation and legitimately enjoy it. And he seems kind, and he seems thoughtful. And so there's absolutely people like that in the industry, where I think, and for him, he's coming out of acting. And I think there have been a lot of podcasters that came out of other industries and are very likable people, and that have realized that podcasting is a really good space for that. There's also people that have came out of other industries that have looked at the opportunity of podcasting, and they don't have as much of a naturally charismatic personality. And it's been a lot more hard for them than they've thought. So I do think that it's a factor. Oftentimes when we are working with businesses, I think the ideal scenario is the CEO or the founder is the one hosting the podcast. Better than ideal scenario is that person also has some charisma to them. They enjoy talking with people, that can listen well, they can bring some personality, but that is not always the case. And so there are some shows that kind of end up being like duds because there's just not a lot of personality there. So I do think that if we're looking at that, you would probably benefit more from having somebody that they were energized by doing what you and I are doing than somebody that's just that strategically just makes the most sense, but is really not energized. So right. I think that's the question is do you actually enjoy this? Do you enjoy talking with people in your industry? And I also think that in general, most people I don't know of a really good reason for somebody to not be thinking about generally being likable or like kind or, you know, listening and intuitive to the people that they're talking with. So I think in general, like that's an important skill in podcasting. I don't think you have to be the most charismatic person in the room. I do think you have to try to be engaging, and you have to listen, and you have to, if you're going to be in podcasting, you should probably be thinking about some of those soft skills and how can you get better at those soft skills, knowing that that's going to translate a lot to your audience.
Yeah, and I like what you said about the charisma. By the way, these days, all the kids are talking about the Riz.
The Riz, yeah, I heard that.
The Riz. You heard that
yeah,
all of a sudden,
the
the Riz is all the rage, whatever. But no, I think they're talking about charisma, and so what you make a great point. I think the distinction is like if your heart is in it.
Yeah.
And naturalness. So those are two ideas I want to bring up. If your heart is in it for real, people can feel that, right? Like for instance, watch any like corporate media station and like the person giving the news and they're all stiff and cardboard and they're all just, their heart's not in it, right? It's someone reading off of a teleprompter. That's all it is. Like their heart's not in it. You can feel it. You're like, oh, this is just somebody, whatever. But somebody like a Joe Rogan, or there's a million people who do podcasts where their heart is in it. So I think if your heart is in it, people actually feel that. And then the second point is you can be natural. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be stiff. Just be yourself. Like that's one of the things that's the greatest thing about one of the greatest things about podcasting is you're not a newscaster on the national news. You're just you. So you can be you and just be yourself. And that doesn't mean you have to, divulge all your hidden secrets or anything, but just be yourself. Just the naturalness. And if your heart's in it, I think listeners feel that. The audience feels that for sure.
Yeah. And I think like paying attention to what energizes you, and it's not getting in like some woo-woo like new age stuff. I'm just saying, like, do you feel more energized or less energized after doing something? Like that's what you should pay attention to. That's one of the reasons why early on I felt like, man, podcasting is like it's natural to me. Right before this, I recorded a like 4-minute video for our website. This hour to hour and a half conversation will take 10% of the energy out of me that it took recording, like looking at a camera and trying to like generally not mess up and do that 5-minute video. Right. And so it's just different mediums, and other people are total opposites. And so I do think paying attention to what is energizing to you. Also, I love the authenticity of podcasting. With a lot of our clients, they're like, okay, so are you going to edit out our likes and ums and all the pauses and different things? And 9 times out of 10, we say no. Obviously, we're going to take stuff out and we're going to edit stuff out that is maybe going to be distracting for the listener. But this is not TV. If I go to, and I don't know why this movie popped into my head, but like if we go to the next Fast and Furious movie, I don't know which one it is, 10, 20, 30, whatever the next one is at the time that whoever's listening to this is listening. If we go to it and, Vin Diesel is like stumbling over his words in the movie and he's using a ton of filler words, we're going to be like, what the heck? Like, I came here and you decided to use 4 minutes of my 2 hours watching this movie with filler words from Vin Diesel. It's because we've been trained to not expect that. We've been trained to, when we see something on the big screen, we've been trained to pretty much assume that it's going to be perfect, it's going to be scripted, and it's going to appear natural. But in conversation, that's not how conversations go. There's filler words, there's pauses. We say we say and that's not necessarily a bad thing. And so we've actually, about a month ago, we had a situation where a client asked us to remove all the filler words from an episode. So we did. Then we sent it to them for review. And they were like, this sounds really, really choppy. Like, this doesn't sound normal. There's not a good cadence to it. And we respectfully told them, Yes, we know it's because we removed all of the filler words. And so part of that is the authenticity of being able to show up and be present in podcasting and it not having to be perfect. Perfection is not a goal in most genres of podcasting. Again, we get into like scripted fiction and highly scripted nonfiction and some genres where, again, with the quality level, the expectations a little bit different. But the authenticity is huge. And I think as people are looking for, do they have the riz or not? I think generally when you're talking about things that are exciting to you and when you're talking about content that's exciting to you or people that are exciting to you, you're going to bring a good level of energy to it. The last thing I'll say on that is just the reality of recording virtual or remote content is you do need to be a little bit more animated than you are when you're talking with people in person. So we usually tell people, like, if you feel like you're being overly expressive when you're filming on a camera or on a podcast, then you're probably just right. Like if you're, and I don't know what it is, but as soon as you put a camera in front of us, it's like, it just flattens everything out. And we feel like, well, man, we just kind of like go into our turtle shell. And so I do think that when we're recording virtual content, we do need to try to be a little bit more expressive than maybe we normally are in order to come through as energetic, as having the riz, as kind of being there. So that's one like real practical thing with kind of like the energy level and how to be that. I try to think about, I forget about it, but we try to coach our clients on that as well.
Yeah, energy is huge. And I just want to point out one distinction. You were talking about taking out the ums and the ahs and the filler words. And that's a great example of if you take them all out, it just sounds weird. It sounds choppy. It sounds unnatural. But here's the thing. It all comes down to naturalness. If someone can say and it's the most natural thing in the world, and that will actually help the flow. It'll help convey the meaning of what they're saying because they're pausing. And this is just natural conversation. So taking out every single is just it. Sometimes taking out an can be good. Sometimes you actually should not take it out. Like it's the wrong thing to do to take it out. But here's when you can always make an edit in audio is when if something really does unnaturally hang too long, or if someone says and then they just pause for way too long, like so it's really all about naturalness. There's no hard and fast rule about what to take out and what not. And breaths too. Some people take out breaths, which is yeah. So I want to ask you about doing something different. Because a lot of people start podcasts and they just, they see what everyone else is doing and they're like, oh, I want to do an interview show and I want to interview entrepreneurs, and nothing wrong with any of that. But as in any medium, there are people who they just go their own way. They just do it differently. Like maybe Dan Carlin is an example of that, right? I mean, who puts out 5.5-hour episodes that are monologues? And it's the most popular one of the most popular podcasts ever in the world. Like, so what I'm saying is there's a lot of opportunity for creativity and doing different things, but a lot of people either they don't have that creativity or they, very purposefully, they just want to stay and do the normal thing. So what are your thoughts on creativity or coming up with a new format or anything creative?
Yeah. I do think that they're like the creative side of this, and then there's the data side of it. So you should be looking at the data for your show. I think one of the most important metrics of your show is retention. Like, are people watching or listening to a high percentage of your show? If they're not, then they're not that engaged and something's off. And so I think that before you just like decide to do something new, you should look at the data to really see, like, are people actually engaged with your show? Are they listening to a high percentage of it? If people are only listening to 10% of your episodes, then something is off. So I think on that sense, you should look at the data. If the data shows you people are not that engaged with your show, why not try something different? Try something that maybe engages a different audience, or maybe look at you're not clear enough with your messaging or your content. I do think as the market gets more creative or gets more saturated, we do need to prioritize creativity. I think podcasting is pretty behind YouTube. And even if we look at like the average numbers of active channels, we're looking at, give or take, these are loose numbers based off of real numbers, give or take 300,000 to 400,000 active podcasts that have published episodes in the last 30 days, and give or take 30 to 35 million active YouTube channels, which is wild. That's like 1% to 2%. So
Wow.
you look at data like that and you realize podcasting is nowhere near saturated. 5 years ago, if you had a podcast, you would probably do better with it 5 years ago than you would now, just because there was probably a third of the podcasts 5 years ago. When we started Small Business Storytellers in 2018, there actually weren't a ton of small business interview shows. Now there are a ton of them. And so I have to look at the market and I have to look at what I'm creating and say, is what I'm going to do going to stand out, or will it blend in? And am I okay with that? Am I okay with it blending in? Or do I actually want to create something more unique? So one of the shows that we're working on right now, it's a business show. The client wants it to actually be unique. The client has a track record that is extremely impressive. And it would actually be a disservice to his resume and the thing that he's accomplished to just have another show that just blends in with all the rest. And so that caused us to step back and say, okay, what does it actually look like to create this show in the best way? And so, we are incorporating voiceovers into it. It's like after we record an episode, we have somebody who's going through and doing more of a structural edit and figuring out, okay, what of these pieces do we need to rearrange this conversation in order to convey a more compelling story? And what third party context can we bring in through voiceovers that were recorded after the recording in order to really create not a Masters of Scale or a Wondery level production where there's 40 people working on an episode, but a little bit higher produced. Like we're adding in some scripts and voiceovers and a little bit of audio engineering. What does it look like to do that? The reason we did that was because we stepped back and we said, what does it look like to actually launch a show that will make noise in the business space? And I think it's super healthy for us to have those conversations, even if we don't move forward with it. The show that I'm going to launch is going to be, I would say, similar in a sense that I'm going to be incorporating some voiceovers. I'm going to be interweaving the episodes together, but not the same production level that we're doing for this client. But me stepping back and asking that question of what does it look like? What would it look like? And maybe don't even think about the budget. Don't even think about the time. Just ask yourself the question, what would it look like for your show to be unique? And then see what you learn from it. Maybe you actually implement the answer. Maybe you implement 10% of the answer. But I think it's super important for us to step back and ask those questions, because as the market gets more saturated, just like YouTube, 10 years ago, YouTube was far less creative than it is now. Now, like the top YouTube channels, they're not showing up to be a top 100 YouTube channel by accident. They are intentional. They have teams behind them. They have data behind them, and they are really putting in the work. That's where podcasting is going. And so it doesn't mean that you can't progressively get there over time. And the last thing I'll kind of say with this is one of our values at Story On that we talk about with our team is we define quality as doing the best that you can with what you have. So my version of quality is not Jordan Harbinger's version of quality. A new YouTuber version of quality is not, Mr. Beast's version of quality. But how can I be responsible with what I have? If what I have right now is an iPhone, actually really, really amazing camera on it for podcasting. And with like $100, you could probably buy a mic that goes in here that's actually pretty darn good. Excuse me. And so looking at what do you currently have and what's the most creative way? What's the best way to serve your audience? And you might be able to do all of that. You might be able to do like 10% of it, but it's super important for us to actually ask those questions.
Definitely. And I want to get your thoughts also on like newer shows or smaller shows sort of growing and get like there seems to be a hump to get over. Like when you start, like you might, you get like 10 downloads or 20 downloads or 3 downloads or something.
Yeah.
And then I guess the average overall in podcasting of downloads per episode is, what is it now? Like 175 downloads per episode or something?
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah.
But people who want to, for instance, run ads on their show and start making money, you have to, I think the minimum's like 10,000 downloads an episode, right? Before you can really start thinking about that. So as far as a new podcast or any small podcast getting over that hump of like, let's say 1,000 or 2,000 or like, how do you grow like that? I mean, and I know marketing is one of these topics that even the experts don't know every little detail. It's not technical. Like my field is audio production, right? It's mostly technical. Mm-hmm. So if there's a problem, I can tell you how to solve it. But marketing people, it's not technical. You're dealing with people and networks and there's no way we can understand all that, right? With our human brains. So what are your thoughts on growing and getting to that next level over the hump?
Yeah. So that's like the big question that I want more answers to as well. So I think some things we have to recognize are if your show is not growing, then people are not sharing it. And that's one thing that like a lot of podcasters, like we have to look in the mirror and recognize like, if my show is not growing, that means people are listening to it and they don't feel compelled to share it. I think there's some episodes that have impacted me so much on a variety of shows. I think of, probably a year ago, there was a episode that Tom Bilyeu did on Impact Theory about cryptocurrency. And cryptocurrency, that's something I've always been curious about from afar. Haven't invested a ton of, but it's been an industry I've been curious to watch. And so there was this episode that he did where it was very much like a crypto 101. It was so well done. It was so fantastic. I have probably sent that episode to 15 different people where there's been individual conversations. And then, I'm just like, you know what? Like this episode is going to give you 100 times more value than I could in the next 5 minutes. It's that much better. That's how podcasts grow. That's one of the ways. That's the organic way. And so I think we have to look at, is my content shareable? Like, is there a reason why somebody would share this piece of content? Some of that's going to be how you market it, how you frame it. Hey, in this episode, you'll learn X, Y, and Z. Is X, Y, and Z actually valuable enough for your person to take an hour out of their time to listen to it? So that's one thing, is we have to look at, is our content actually shareable? Is there a reason that your target audience would share this with somebody else they know? That's one element of it. I do think that paid growth is going to become more important. Jordan Harbinger is amazing. I think he's one of the best podcasters. I mean, by numbers, he's one of the best podcasters in the country. But I tell all of my clients to pay attention to not just his show, but how he does it, how he shows up. And he's somebody where he publicly talks about spending a large amount of money every month in advertising his show on other shows. So if he's a top 10 podcaster and he's been doing this for years, then I think that's a really good indicator. We probably don't all have huge budgets to do that, but I do think that if you're starting a show, experimenting a little bit with paid advertising is worth it. I think that where that money goes, there's that's a whole nother conversation. We can talk about that if you want, but I think that's something that is becoming more popular and more feasible. Again, if you have people coming back to your show from paid ads and your retention is low, people aren't sharing it. Like pretty much if your content sucks, then paid ads aren't going to fix your show. And so all of this, like we can talk about growth, but if our content sucks and our audience doesn't like our content, then we can apply all the best growth strategies in your show, still not going to grow. But yeah, those are kind of some thoughts that we think through. Is one, we have to have good content. Our content has to be shareable. And I do think it's increasingly becoming worth it to do paid ads. And as the market gets more saturated, that's going to become more normal.
Right. Yeah. The trying to like putting out content that your listeners want to share. Can you sort of back engineer that? Like, can you, because I mean, I maybe that's a dumb question, but like, what can you think about in advance? Like, why would people share? Like for me, why would someone share something about audio production? Or so can you back engineer these things, or is it just a matter of putting out good content and asking them to share?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think you can I would say reverse engineer. That's the term we use, but back engineering, same kind of thing. So we often with our shows, when we're kind of often thinking about like the first 10 episodes, and oftentimes those first 10 episodes are, what are some of the most common questions you're getting from your audience? So if you look at like, what problems does your audience have? What questions are they asking you? Are there conversations that you keep having over and over and over again? For you, maybe you realize like, man, I have explained the difference between a podcast editor and an audio engineer so many times that I can't even count. That would probably be an indicator that would be an episode that might be shareable. So I think you can reverse engineer it by looking at what conversations are we having with our dream audience and with our community that we keep having, or are there commonly asked questions, or what are their main problem and pain points? You know, we can get more technical with getting into keyword research online. You know, on the symbol level, starting to type into Google and seeing what Google and what YouTube auto populates is indicative of what people are searching. On the more advanced level, you could use tools like TubeBuddy or Keywords Everywhere to actually see what is search volume for certain questions. And you might look at that and you might realize in your world that, you know, podcast or sound engineering, when you type in what is sound engineering, there might be, there might be 20,000 people that are typing that into YouTube, but there might be 15 million videos about that. And then you might realize, well, there's also, there's 2,000 people a month that are typing in not what is sound engineering, but how to become a sound engineer. And there's dramatically less results for that video. And so you can do some back engineering with things like that with tools where you can begin to realize what questions are people asking? What are they asking in my community? What are they asking online? And I think that's a really, really good place to start with what is shareable content for my community.
Yeah. By the way, the term back end, you know why I said back engineering? Because Bob Lazar uses that term. Remember Bob Lazar from Area 51?
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, I was like, I'm sure there's much better. Yeah, I mean, you've been podcasting for longer than I have. You know much more about the space. So there's probably a lot more. You probably know all the right technical terms than me.
No, I don't. I think back engineering is just I've never heard anyone use it except Bob Lazar.
That's funny.
So, all right. We're getting close to the end here, but I did want to ask you about this whole, the whole new Chat GPT stuff and how that's impacting podcasts. I mean, like you just said, you can do some keyword research or find out what questions people are asking and how many videos are addressing that and all that stuff. I mean, can you literally ask Chat GPT to figure that stuff out, or is it not that advanced so far? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. So to my knowledge, I don't think that you can ask. I don't think that ChatGPT would be processing like another layer of data actively while it's, I think that ChatGPT, and there's probably a ton of people that are listening to this that are like, you guys have no idea what you're talking about. Apologies. So I do know that ChatGPT is, it's like referring to what's on the internet. It's using what's on the internet, but I would look at like actively looking at real-time data of YouTube search results. I think that's like another layer of data that I don't know if we've seen like the combination of those things. I actually haven't thought about the fact of like being able to go in and say, hey, Chat GPT or whatever I want to call him or her. I haven't thought about being able to go on there and say, I'm wanting to do a podcast about, podcasting.
Yeah.
What's the highest search volume focus, has the least volume of results that's going to increase my chances of going viral? I haven't thought about that. It's probably coming in some way, shape, or form. It doesn't really change my approach that much, which is there's absolutely stuff that should be being used with AI. We're kind of exploring this as an agency right now, figuring out like what are the best ways for us to use it. There's some really, really great tools like Capsho and a handful of different other ones that are focused on podcasters. Right now, we're using it for transcripts. It's like a no-brainer. Like I remember like 5 years ago, spending, I got to the place where for an hour-long interview, it would take me about 1.5x that time to write a word-for-word transcript. So I got to be a very, very fast typer because I was actually like transcribing stuff. Now, that happens in 2 minutes and the transcript is done immediately after the episode. And so there's things like that where it's like, great, let's do that. We've also seen good success with like summaries and different things, like using whether it's ChatGPT or other tools where you input the audio or you input the transcript and then have it write a summary. There's a lot of things I do not like about AI and podcasting right now. So I've seen some examples of people that are super excited about the like text to voice AI tools. So like, okay, hey, ChatGPT, write me a 1,000-word article about Chris Curran. And then it does it. And then I put that prompt into a AI tool that I have fed my voice into. And then it speaks, gives a podcast to my voice. I haven't heard anything that doesn't sound off in doing that. And so I've seen some people that are using it right now and it just doesn't seem quite there yet. I'm curious. I'm like very aware and super curious about it all. The thing that I am really pretty interested in that we're not super close to yet. I heard James Cridland from Pod News talking about this, and he said that he used some tool, tested out some firm in London, and this was like a year ago. So this was before ChatGPT. And he said he went and he spoke. They recorded him talking for like a whole day, and he had to sign all of these papers and non-disclosures and all this stuff. And at the end of the day, they take his voice and hit a button that said, now we're going to take this episode and transmit it into James Cridland speaking this episode in French or in Portuguese. So stuff like that is super interesting. Obviously, there's ethical things and concerns and all that stuff. But as far as me being able to podcast in English and then use tools to potentially get some of that content in other languages so that people could actually listen to that content and learn in their native language, that's interesting. I don't think we're there yet, but those are kind of some of the things I'm like thinking about. I think we're still really, really early for it to be impacting podcasting in a quality way beyond like pretty menial tasks like transcripts and writing summaries and writing social media copy. Like we still need people actively involved in the entire podcasting process. Right. And I don't think that's going away soon.
Right. Well, yeah. So, wow, this has just been so good. I want to ask you one last question, but before I do, just want to remind everyone, Seth's website is successwithstories.com. Go check it out. That's Story on Media and Marketing. A premier podcasting agency helping established business leaders expand their influence through podcasting. So that's really cool. And there'll be other links below, so check that out. But it seems like when you learned about podcasting and then started doing your own, something clicked inside you. And how would you describe that? Like, how would you describe I assume you have a love of podcasting, because that's what I'm feeling. We're all feeling that. So what is that love for podcasting? What do you feel, and what do you see, and how do you feel?
Yeah, I don't think I've ever thought about it in that way. I just feel like it's one of the most authentic forms of content. I think some of that is the unscripted nature. I think some of it is when people are listening to podcasts, they're usually not stumbling upon it. You know, podcasts are usually not like scroll stoppers. Usually, and again, I say usually, like there's always exceptions, but usually podcast listeners are showing up to learn about something. And I think that's really intriguing because that aligns with me. I love learning. I love learning new things. I love going deep into learning about those new things. So I think I just love that podcasting is I think it's such an authentic form of content. I got into marketing because I felt like most marketing is horribly non-authentic. And so I was really looking for what's the most authentic way for businesses to be able to market. And so I think it's just been really refreshing for me. I was not thinking about podcasting when I started my business. I was thinking like video content and video is great, and there's plenty of authentic video creators. But I think the authenticity of podcasting, particularly for businesses, if they're doing it right, it can be a really authentic way for them to talk about the impact that they're doing. And that's one of the reasons I love it and why I've chosen to really, really focus and try and learn as much as I can and do the best job that we can for our shows and for our clients.
Sweet. You have any events, anything coming up?
Not
Well, Podcast
really.
Movement is in Denver in August of this year. So
yeah, Podcast Movement is hosting a Denver podcast meetup. So that's that. I think that's like June 30th or something. It's end of June.
Oh, sweet.
So so I'll go there. I'm not like putting it on. They're part of their little podcast tour thing. But yeah, I mean, I've really enjoyed our Colorado podcast meetups, and I'm excited to. I think we'll probably try and do some like smaller, even more localized things over the next year with that, which would be fun. But yeah, Podcast Movement's here in Denver. Honestly, just trying to stay really focused with the business. Trying to kind of start to bring in more clients, grow our team, but also a big priority for us this year is to actually launch some more of our own shows. I've realized that it has been pretty easy to hide behind my clients for the last couple of years. It's easier to tell their stories than the stories that we feel like we're supposed to tell. So that's one thing that we really want to do this year is get back into the creator mode for our own content. And I think that's pretty important to focus on this year for us.
That's awesome. Well, this has been great. What a great lounge. This has been the most educational lounge ever, I think. This has been so helpful. Really, it just helps understand so much from a higher level. And because I always feel like that's a way you can avoid a lot of mistakes in your life. If you zoom out and try to understand things from a more macro level, then when you get really micro and you zoom in, you kind of know if what you're doing serves the big picture or not. So I love conversations like this. All right. Well, the links are below. Seth, thanks, man. This is great. We have to do it again sometime if you ever, if you have time.
No, absolutely. Yeah. This is fun. I love about this. And there's a lot to learn. I mean, I probably should have just asked you a ton of questions too, because I know there's a lot to learn from you and your experience as well.
Yeah, no, all good. I talk about audio so much and all that, but all right, so we'll end it here. Yeah, Seth, just stay on for a second. We'll, as Viva says, we'll say our proper goodbyes. But all right, thanks everybody for watching. And the next cohort of Podcast Engineering School starts on June 27th, 2023. So anyway, that should be great. So, all right, we'll see y'all next time. Thanks for watching. And if you have any questions, obviously put them in the comments and tag me and Seth and all that. So, all right, we'll see you guys. Bye.